We're here on Daf Heyom at Aleph, and we got up to Rabbi Yochanan. And that's about, I'd say, 10 lines down from the top of the Yomi. Again, all the Amoraim are crying out of a sense of what we call Emas Hadin, the fear of judgment, because they read Sukkim and they see how harsh judgment could be. And Rabbi Yochanan Kimoti Laikra, he cries when he gets to a pasuk in Eov. And the Satan comes in front of the Ribono Shalom to be makatreg on Eov. And as a result, all the catastrophes happen. Eov's children die, his money is consumed, and nevertheless, Eov continues with his tzimus, with his very simple but very profound dedication to God. And at some point, Hashem turns to the Satan. Vayomer Hashem al Satan, Hasamto libcha el avdi Eov. Have you paid attention? You realize that my servant Eov, ein kamo ba'aretz, there's no one like him. Ish tam v'yasher yirei Elokim, sar mira, vodenu machzik b'tumaso, meaning despite all the challenges that you put in his way, he still is dedicated to his faith in God, and he is loyal to me. And the pasuk says, "Vatisiteni bo leva'alo chinam," and you did a hasata. Hasata is when you try to entice a person to leave the right path and go on the wrong path. You took away his children. You took away his mammon. And this is your way of testing. But in truth, even though you tested him, he is still continuing to be strong and dedicated and loyal with his great tzidkus. And as a result, Hashem says to the Satan, you have succeeded in drawing me to your eitzah, to your thinking of bringing destruction upon Eov. And it was all bechinam, it was all in vain, because you see that he survived all your tests, he passed them with flying colors. And the simple pshat in the pasuk seems to indicate that Kaviyachal HaKadosh Baruch Hu was drawn by the eitzah of Satan, and therefore Rabbi Yochanan cries, and he declares, Eved Sherabo Mesitin also. You have an Eved, which is the Satan in this mashal, and Rabo is HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and yet the Eved is Mesitin also. The Eved is able to be Mesis HaKadosh Baruch Hu, to, in a sense, seduce Kaviyachal HaKadosh Baruch Hu and Nisans. And as a result of the fact that HaKadosh Baruch Hu was drawn and, so to speak, influenced by these Mesitim, then a servant of God, a true loyal servant of God, Eov, was brought to suffer such Yisurim. And if this is the way God allows the Satan to bring Yisurim and terrible catastrophe on an Eved who is totally loyal and dedicated to Hashem, is Takana Yeshlo. Can an Eved of Hashem really find any way out? Can he find any resolution, any salvation? How could he stand in front of the Satan and expect that the Satan won't be a mesis and seduce Kaviyachal HaKadosh Baruch Hu into testing man in the greatest of all tests? And therefore Rabbi Yochanan breaks out in tears. Again, a pasuk. Rabbi Yochanan Kimoti Laikra Bachi, when he got to another pasuk in Eov, he cried, Hein b'kedoshav lo yamin. HaKadosh Baruch Hu doesn't even believe in kedoshav, in those who are totally sanctified and dedicated to the sanctity of God and fulfilling God's will. And Rabbi Yochanan now formulates a kal v'chomer, iba kedoshav lo yamin. If HaKadosh Baruch Hu doesn't even believe in tzaddikim that are called kedoshav, and he still thinks and suspects they're going to sin, and that the Torah will not protect them, is b'man yamin. Who will he believe in? Even those who are dedicated to mitzvahs in the proper way and will not sin, God doesn't trust them. God will not rely on them. The kedoshav lo yamin. And I have a comment here in the footnote. It says, the Gemara understands the pasuk as saying that B'chol tzaddikim ein HaKadosh Baruch Hu mamen. God doesn't believe in any of the tzaddikim, and their Torah will not protect them. And Rabbi Yochanan said, if that be the case, to whom or upon whom does God rely? And now the Gemara is going to tell a story about something that Rabbi Yochanan actually witnessed. And from this story, we'll shed a light on the interpretation of this pasuk in the year. Yom Echad, there was one day, and Rabbi Yochanan was having ozil biruk. He was on his road. Chazi saw lahu gavra, a person, davimanki te'ene. He was collecting or harvesting te'enim, or figs. Shavik hanach dematu. It's interesting. This was a very great surprise to Rabbi Yochanan to witness a man who would leave on the tree the figs that were fully developed, fully matured. The shakal, which figs did he actually harvest? Anach delo mati. Those who haven't yet matured. He was collecting the te'enim that had not yet been zbasha. Amalei, Rabbi Yochanan says to the man, Lav hani ma'al fei, why don't you take the better quality figs? Why don't you harvest those that are already edible and they are mature? Why are you busy collecting those figs that haven't yet ripened? Amalei, so the man responded, Hani, those figs that I'm collecting, li'archa be'inalu, I need them as food for my journey. I'm going on a very long journey. And for my purpose, the best figs to take off the tree for my journey are those that are not yet ripe. Because honey, these natron, they will remain in a state, natron means shmira, right? They will remain, so to speak, protected. They won't quickly spoil. The honey, but those that are already fully matured, low natron, it's impossible to maintain and preserve them long term because they quickly will spoil. And Rabbi Yochanan, in this exchange, revealed a fundamental principle about God's treatment of tzaddikim. Omar, Rabbi Yochanan declared, Hainu diksiv, now I can shed a light on the pasuk Hein b'kedoshav lo yamin. Just like that man was afraid that the fully ripened figs would spoil, so HaKadosh Baruch, when he sees young tzaddikim, he doesn't believe in them. Lo yamin, the pasuk says. He's afraid they're going to sin, they're going to spoil with the passage of time. So what does he do? Misalka min ha'olam hazeh kedei shelo yechtu klal. If he has a suspicion that they will spoil, then he removes them from this world before they'll spoil. Sometimes God takes the life of a person prematurely so that he will be judged after death as a tzaddik, and he won't violate the Torah and spoil with the passage of time. But when it comes to tzaddikim who are older and most of their years have passed and they've dedicated their years to righteousness, God is not afraid that they will sin, and the Torah will protect them from sin. And therefore God leaves them in this world. He doesn't take them away from this world. The Gemara says, is that really the pshat in the pasuk? Eni va'ahu talmida Davi b'shvivusa de Rabbi Alexandroi. There was a certain student of Torah who lived in the neighborhood of Rabbi Alexandroi, v'shachiv adezutar. He died when he was a young man. Fi Omar, and Rabbi Alexandroi declared regarding this young man, Iboy haimi rabbonon avichai. If this Talmud Chacham would have gone in the right path, then he would have lived a longer life. He brought upon himself his premature death because he wasn't going on the right path. Lo halach b'derech ha'yishara. So the Gemara asks, Isa, if you accept the principle of Rabbi Yochanan as he interpreted the pasuk, that God will pluck those young bachrim who are tzaddikim and take them out of this world and bring them upon them a premature death in order that they shouldn't sin, is Dilma, perhaps this Talmud who died prematurely would fit in the category of Mehein Kedoshim Lo Yamenav. How did Rabbi Alexandroi draw the conclusion that this Talmud was not going on the right path? According to Rabbi Yochanan, we derive from this pasuk in Eov a principle that could justify and explain why this young Talmud was taken prematurely from this world, but it has nothing to do with the fact that he was nichshal b'chet, that he was going off b'derech lo yeshara. So we see clearly that Rabbi Alexandroi did not accept Rabbi Yochanan's interpretation of the pasuk. Any more answers? No. In truth, Rabbi Alexandroi accepted Rabbi Yochanan's principle. But that Talmud, it was known about that particular Talmud that he had a laid-back attitude towards his Rebbeim, and he sometimes was mezalzel. Mevayik means mezalzel in them, and therefore he died prematurely. But as far as the pasuk came, B'Kedoshim Lo Yamin, the way Rabbi Yochanan interpreted that pasuk, Rabbi Alexandroi is very much on board. And although that particular Talmud died prematurely because he was lo holech b'derech yeshara, but nevertheless there are others who will be taken prematurely in order to guarantee that they don't sin. Rabbi Yochanan kimati laikroi bachi, another pasuk in Malachi at the end of Tanakh, when the Navi is describing that period of time right before the ultimate redemption, Kodem HaGeula, and Rabbi Yochanan understood from this pasuk the kind of judgment that God would bring about, and Rabbi Yochanan broke out in tears. The Karavti Aleichem HaMishpat. God says, I personally will involve myself in judging you. And Vayisi Aid, I will serve as testimony, as witness, to judge you. Memayer, and with urgency. God is getting personally involved. He's going to testify against the person in judgment, and it's going to be with urgency. And now the last part of this pasuk will compare two categories of sinners. The first category of sinner is machshafim umenafim uveminishbaim lasheker. These are individuals who violated capital crimes, like in the case of a machashef, where the Torah says machashef lo sechaya, or niuf, which is of course one of the aser sadibros, nishbal checkers, one of the aser sadibros. These are the most severe averos. And look at the end of the pasuk: ubi oshke schar sachir, those who fail to pay their employees, which is a violation of Allah, and yet in one breath describing the judgment of God, which is personally being judged by God in order to destroy the Rishayim. God does so personally with urgency, and he testifies against the person. So Rabbi Yochanan breaks out in tears, and he declares, Evet sherabo mekarvo leduno. If a person, a human being who serves God, is being called in front of the Ribono Shalom, God is the Dayan. He himself serves as the judge to bring the judgment against the sinner. And not only that, umemar lo ha'ido, he's very quick with urgency to testify against this person. He's not going to wait and delay judgment until other witnesses come to the court. Is takoni yeshlo? Rhetorical question. Is it possible that the Eved has any faith, any hope? Can he hold out any hope to be zocher b'din? There's no way that he can find some sort of leniency or some sort of explanation in his din. Not mitzad the dayan, meaning HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and not mitzad Eidim, because God is the Eid as well. There's nowhere to turn. Omer Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. Woe to us that this pasuk in Eov equates relatively light sins, like, for example, not paying your employees, where you violate an Easter law. In truth, I have to comment here, the Gemara in Bava Metzia says that a person who violates paying his workers on time violates 5 different lavin. But in any event, there are only lavin, and relative to capital crimes like Masechet lo Sachaya, they are kalos. Kimo chamuros. God in this pasuk compares kalos to chamuros. The menafim and the machshefim, who are chayiv misa, are being compared in the pasuk by analogy to those who violate averos kalos, like not paying their workers on time. And both seem to be judged the same way. And the Mesilas Yesharim, the Ramchal says, for sure, we can't take the Gemara at face value that the punishment for averos kalos is the same identical punishment as for violating averos chamuros. HaKadosh Baruch Hu's kela emunah ve'ein ava. God pays back a person midah keneged midah according to the chumras havera. But rather, what the Gemara means is that in a certain sense, averos kalos are equal to chamuros because they too are brought onto the scale, the kaf maznayim, at the time of judgment. And you would have thought, says the Mesilas Yesharim, that if a person is being condemned in the heavenly court for averos chamuros, then the averos kalos, which are relatively lenient and light, are completely bata. No, they won't be bata. God will judge equally, both averos chamuros and averos kalos. Each one will get their ownage. But there's no vitur over here, and God is not allowing the averos kalos to fall off the earth. They're very much there and part of the mishpat. That's how severe and harsh divine judgment is. I'm reminded of a story. I don't know if you ever heard the story about an Apikoros who came to the Vilna Gaon to argue, heresy against the Vilna Gaon's belief in God and Torah and so forth. And at one point, the Vilna Gaon or his wife, I don't know, offered him something to drink. So the Apikoros started drinking. So the Vilna Gaon stopped him and said, make a bracha. We don't drink without a bracha. So the man said, I don't believe in God. You tell me to make a bracha. So the Vilna Gaon said to him, don't think that just because you don't believe in God, you're not going to be judged for every single avera that you violate. You better make a bracha. Amar Reish Lakish, kol amata dino shel ger. If a person is in judgment, judges a ger, and he's mata dino. Mata dino means he judges him falsely. And he declares that he's guilty when really in truth he was innocent. Is ke'ilu mata dino shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's as if Kaviyachol, God is in judgment, not the ger, and he is vilifying the judgment of God. Shenemar, and we go back to the pasuk in Malachi that Rabbi Yochanan quoted earlier. And at the end of that pasuk, it says, "V'karavti aleichem lamishpat, vayisi eid," etc. Almana v'yasam umate ger. Umate means to tip the ger. V'lo yeruni, and they don't fear me. Omar Hashem tzvakos. That's the end of the pasuk. So the simple meaning of the pasuk is that God will condemn those who falsely judged in a judgment of the ger to be mechayev the ger shalom kedin. But the Gemara says umati ksiv. We read it with a tzera under the test umate, but in truth we should darshan the pasuk the way it's written. Mem tes yud with the vocalization of umati, which means mata os. And the meaning now of the pasuk is that the same way that you are mate the ger, you're being mata os HaKadosh Baruch Hu says that if you're mata the mishpat of a ger, kaviyochel, you're being mata otzi, you're condemning me in the scales above. What does this mean? So he has a note here. He says, but pashtus, again, before we see this note, I'll tell you what I think is pshat, but pashtus, is that God and the ger are like one and the same, meaning that God identifies totally with the ger, and anything you do to the ger, it's like you're doing to God himself. He says, b'pashtus, tam adov shemata mishpato shel ger nefshav kemata mishpato shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu mipnei shenemar legabi shvachav shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu dvarim perek yud v'oev ger. God is described as he who loves the ger. Ukshadayin machayev es hager nimtza shu matriach es HaKadosh Baruch Hu l'shalem leger. God loves the ger. Now, this judge is falsely forcing the ger to pay, let's say, $1,000 in a court case. God, since he loves the ger, he's going to have to make up that $1,000 to the ger. From this hatoyas hadid, because God has to jump in, get involved, and he has to reimburse, so to speak, to pay back the ger for his loss. Then it's as if you were mata dino shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Omar Chadina bar Papa. Ola osed var. You have to add the word avera. Umischared bo. Again, interpreting this pasuk that we just read from Malachi. If he regrets his avera, and usually, hopefully, he'll do so immediately after he violated the avera. Mochlin lo miyad. Immediately, there's mechila on that avera shenemar, because at the end of the pasuk it says v'lo yera uni amar Hashem tzvakos. HaKadosh Baruch Hu declares that he's going to bring to mishpat those who don't have fear of God. They have sins, but they're not afraid of him. Lo yeruni. Ha yeruni. The implication is that if they have fear of God, then even though they did sins, they were mischaret, they immediately regretted and had remorse for their sins, and mochlim lehem biyad. God will forgive their sins immediately because they are true Yirei Hashem, and out of Yira they are mischaret on their sins. Amongst the various psukim that brought Rabbi Yochanan to tears because of the mishpat of Hashem, we're now going to learn a pasuk in Koheles. Rabbi Yochanan kimoti like krabach in the 12th parak of Koheles. If you're still awake by the time you get to the 12th parak, ki heskol ma'aseh Elokim yavi b'mishpat. Any action of man is brought by God for judgment. And it says, Al kol ne'elam. Ne'elam means that which is concealed. And then the end of that pasuk, the continuation of that pasuk says, Impov v'im ra. God will bring to mishpat all the actions of man, even actions that are ne'elamim mimenu, that are concealed from him. What does that mean, they are concealed from him? That man is not aware of the fact that he sinned? Of course, man is aware of the fact that he sinned. He sinned deliberately, intentionally. No. But what the pasuk is addressing with the word nelam are maisim shenasu b'shogeg. In other words, he wasn't aware of the fact that he was violating an Isa. It was unintentional. It was not deliberate. And Rabbi Yochanan cries because Evet Sharabo Shokel O Shgogos Kizdonos. The Almighty, as the master of the Eved, is judging his Eved al kol ne'elam, for every shgaga, his donuts, as if they were done, these actions were done deliberately. Is Takari Yeshlo, can he hope to survive? Now, once again, we have to get back to the Mesil Yitzarim, because it's impossible to interpret this Gemara in the straightforward way that God is going to judge a person for shkagos and punish him as if he had violated deliberate sins donos. That's impossible. But rather, it means the following. A shogeg will be punished by onish kal. The Mazid who's deliberate will be punished with an onish chum, or a harsh punishment, as we said above, with regard to shokel kalos kichamuros. However, the point that Rabbi Yochanan is making here is that God is not going to look away and ignore even the shkagos. God is not mavater on the shkagos. And that's frightening, because takana yeshlo, if God is going to come with harsh judgment on shkagos, we're in bad shape. Gemara continues, what does the pasuk mean when it says al kol ne'elam? What is this davar mu'at? A slight violation that God will not allow to go unheeded, but rather, even on these relatively light kind of violations, God is going to bring us to judgment. Amar Rav Zahore Kina b'fnei Chavero Nimos. Shmuel Amar Zaharak b'fnei Chavero v'Nimos. Sometimes we do things in the presence of others, and those others are very sensitive. They can't tolerate something repulsive. They get nauseous from it. And you talk about davar nela, something that's a davar mu'at. Like, for example, he kills a bug in the presence of his friend, and his friend is totally disgusted by it. God will judge you for that. You should have been more sensitive. Even if it's a davar mu'at, people don't see it, they don't pay attention to it, they don't consider it an avera, but yet it is a lack of sensitivity, or Shmuel's example of someone who spits in front of his friend, and it's quite disgusting. I always wondered about the Lubavitcher minhag, a Rick, they spit during a lenu, but once I saw the Rebbe spit, and it was beautiful. Did I ever tell you this, Rabbi? Oh, wow. I don't know how he perfected it. It was like a perfect, I don't know what to call it, like an amud, went up and down, some vertical thing. It was like amazing to me. It's not just like you spit like that. It disgusts everyone around. I happened to be standing behind the Rebbe at the time, so I got a good look. And people, honestly, they do all sorts of things, the way they clean their noses. I don't want to go into detail, but they do repulsive things in the presence of others. And that's a lack of sensitivity. Now, at the end of the pasuk, it says, I'll call Nelam im tov v'im ra. What is that? God is going to judge even things that are tov, even Maisa Adam, Tovim. Why would God judge Maisa Tovim? And again, another expression of the harsh judgment of God. Amri Debei Rav Yanni had no saint stuck Eliani b'Faresia. What's so terrible? He gave charity publicly to its stock to an ani, a poor person. But the answer is that even stuck as a Maisa Tov has a mixture in it of davar ra, because he embarrasses the ani publicly. The ani wants to get a gift in private. He heard Rav Yanai, the story of Rav Yanai, who gavra de kayoyev zusin yani b'Faresia. Rabbi Yani witnessed a person giving tzedakah to an ani publicly, and he gave him a zuz, which, by the way, that's a significant gift. Right? You can buy a goat with 2 zuzim. Amar lei, so Rabbi Yani says to this person, mutav delo yavlo. It would have been a better idea for you not had given that stock at all. Because mehashta the yavis lei uksafte, ksafte means ksufa is embarrassing, humiliated you. It says you are mavayashin. So we see that even in the case of a dvar mitzvah, a person who's motivated to do the good deed, in this case charity, and yet it's got a davar ra in it. And even on that davar ra within the mitzvah, that admixture of something that's ra in the tov, that will also be a subject of judgment. I mean, at this point, I want to break out in tears myself. Because, even when a person does tshuva, there's an admixture of pniot, so This is really harsh judgment. Kechut HaSaira, as we say. The Be'er of Shili Amri, they had a slightly different take in the pasuk Im Tov V'Im Ra. Zan no sein stakal isha b'seiser. Kamaisi lo b'lidei chashor. I think what this means, and again, it's quite shocking, is that when you pay a woman for harlotry, obviously she's a zona, that's a terrible thing. And now you're giving a woman money in a certain clandestine, in a private place. People might think that she's a woman of ill repute. And the Torah tells us at the end of the Sefer Bamidbar, Vayisem Nekiyah me'Hashem Yisrael. Now, there's also a violation here, besides Vayisem Nekiyah, of Lifnei Evil Osite Michshel, because other people will suspect that this woman is guilty of immorality. And those people will violate the prohibition of Achoshed B'Ksherin, which is Loka B'Gufa. You don't want to be Choshed B'Ksherin. What I find a little bit amazing here about the Be'er of Shiloh is that he mentions nothing about the man. I would think that if this looks like payment for that service, then the man is unjustifiably being machshel others in thinking that he had this relationship with this woman. That's a violation of Islam. But I guess it's a lot worse for the woman. I mean, her reputation could be totally destroyed if people send out this message. And you know how it works. One person says one thing, and then before you know it, it's splashed on the front pages. Rava has a different scenario to describe under Im Tov V'Ra. Zeh mishager li'ishto basar she'eno mechutach bi'arvei Shabbosos. When you shecht an animal, after the shechita, you need what's called nikur. In Yiddish, it's called treibim. And it means you have to cut out the chelef and also certain gidim that are prohibited, like the gid anosh. And the man sends a raw piece of meat right after shechita on Erev Shabbos to a woman, and it's mechutach without nikur. And on the one hand, that's a great mitzvah because he wants to make sure that she'll have meat for Shabbos. That's great. But nevertheless, this woman is in a beholah. She's very quickly, it's, a few minutes before Shkiah, before sunset on Erev Shabbos to prepare for Shabbos. And she doesn't pay attention to the fact that this basar is not menuka. She may come chas v'shalom to feed herself and her family chelev or gid. And this comes under lifnei iver, but with a twist that it's toch kidei ma'aseh mitzvah. That's im tov im ra. This is the ra that's ma'urav in the tov. Or Rava asks the Gemara mishager. We know that Rava used to send his wife on Erev Shabbos meat that wasn't properly kosher. And now keep in mind that Rava is an Eid Nibar of Chizda. He's married to Rav Chizda's daughter. Basra of Chizda, the Kimle Begava, the Bekia. He knew about his wife, the daughter of Rav Chizda, that she knew with Bekias, with expertise, Eich Lavchin, how to determine whether the meat was before Nikar or after Nikar. So she would certainly do the Nikar. And she would, Chashom, never even dream of serving this on Shabbos or on any day of the week for that matter. Rabbi Yochanan Kimati like Rav Achi, another pasuk. It's the end of Sefer Dvarim, the Tochach in Parshas Vayelech. V'haya kitim tza'ena oso ra'os rabos v'tzaros. When man it will befall upon man terrible sorrows, then he'll come back to Hashem hopefully. Is Evet Sharabo Mamsi Lo Rose with sorrows, Takana Yeshlo. It seems that the Rav, meaning HaKadosh Baruch Hu in this mashal, is bringing upon man rows with sorrows, terrible catastrophes. And can you expect that a person will successfully overcome these challenges and he'll save himself? These are rows, rabos with sorrows. So my rows fit sorrows. We have these two categories. Rows, which are sorrows. So what's the difference between rows and sorrows? Omar Rav, rows, shenasos, sorrows, zu, zu. We have a concept of sorrows, zu, zu. It means it's a ra because there's one sorrow that has an influence, so to speak, in flaring up another sorrow. Kigon, zibura vakraba. These are dangerous insects. Like a zibura is, I think in English, a hornet. And an akraba is a scorpion. And imagine if both the hornet and the scorpion will bite the same person. And what happens is that there's almost a symbiotic operation here, an activity of partnership between the Sarah and the Akra. And this is based on a Gemara in Avodah Zarah Daf Chav Ches with regard to the refuah, how to save a person who was bitten by a scorpion. And the Gemara describes that you boil up water and that's in the case of an akrav. However, right, so, and that's what you put on the scorpion bite, pour on it hot water. But in the case of a tzara, of a hornet that bit him, the refuah is mayim karim. So what do you do in this case? The man was bitten by both a scorpion and a hornet. He's in real trouble now, because how do we treat such a person? It's countered, it's a counter case where if you use cold water, that's good for the tzira, but it's terrible for the akrav. If you do use hot water, it's great for the akrav, but it's terrible for the tzira. So at the end of the day, we won't be able to administer the healing process that we need to in a case where a person was bitten by both an akrav and a tzira. Ain't truthful amakos. And this is Rav's interpretation of Ra'os Rabos, Vitzaros. In other words, they are multiple Ra'os, right? He was bitten by both. And it's Tzaros, they are Tzaros Zulizu. Tzaros Zulizu means when one is opposed to the other. Shmuel Amar. Shmuel goes back to the Pasuk in Tov Imra. Zeh amamsi lo mos li oni b'shas dochak. This is a great mitzvah. After all, he presents charity to a poor person at a moment of dochak, when the ani is literally being choked by his poverty. But there's an admixture of evil in this tzedakah. Why? Because he gave it b'shas dochak. He waited until the man, the recipient, the ani, was desperate. That's called dochak. It's like he's about to collapse. Give him the most earlier. Prevent him from reaching that state of dochak, where he doesn't have food on the table. So if you give tzedakah, make sure you give it ba'od moed, kodem chasat chak, early enough, so the ani could buy what he has to buy, even if he has to buy cheap food, but he'll have food on the table, and he won't be in a desperate situation where he's about to collapse. He is b'shas dochak, or preventive. Right? They say the prevention is 9/10 of the cure. My father told me that the one who originated that was the Rambam himself. It's all based on the Rambam's knowledge as a physician. Now, he adds another element here into the equation based on a sefer called the Shnos Chaim, that if you would have given him, the ani, those funds early enough, then he could have purchased the tefua at that time in the shuk at a cheaper rate. But now that you waited, the price of the tefua went up, and it's very expensive, and that same amount of money that you've given him, that you've earmarked and allotted to him, is no longer going to provide the tefua that he needs to survive. Amar Rava says, Hainu di Amri Inchi, this concept that a person b'shas chak is going to simply have to empty his pockets. He has no choice. He has to buy whatever they charge him. He's desperate. They could charge him through the roof. And that is reflected in a common idiomatic phrase, Usa li alala lo shchicha. To find grains that will sell at the price of a zuz, that's not common. Lo shchicha. Litlisa shchiach. If b'shas adchak the ani has to buy a small amount of mazon, the amount that talisa means that you would hang into a basket. In other words, people give tzedakah to the aniyim when they see that they're already in a state of desperate dochak without any mizonos. And very often at that point in time, the mizonos are being sold on a very high price. And with the most that you gave to the ani, he doesn't have enough funds to purchase mazon. He'll collapse. And how much ma'at mazon does he need? Just enough to put into his basket. And that will sustain him. But he doesn't have the money because right now the tefua is up. The prices are up in the skies. Had you given him this same amount of money earlier in time, he could have bought tefua at a cheaper rate and survived. And now we're going to read a pasuk in the Tochacha of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Moshe Rabbeinu to Am Yisrael. It says in Dvarim Perek Lamed Aleph, V'chara api bo bayom hahu, Mazavtim v'starti panai mihem, v'yolech chol u'mitzau raos rabos v'tzaros. Amar bar dela bar tiv Yomi. Amar Rav. Let's derive from the pasuk v'starti panai mihem that if a person is suffering from a hanhag of Hashem towards him of histarti panai, then it's considered mayhem, histarti panai mayhem. And what's the emphasis on the word mayhem? It means that if the noeg imo behester panim, God relates to this person as if God was not there. He's not present. In other words, the person is crying out to Hashem from the fear of his sorrows. and no one is responding to his tefillah. It's not miskabelas. And his tefillah is not successfully preventing all these tzaras from happening. And if you see someone that is suffering this Hester Punim, that he's constantly crying out to Hashem for the tzaros, and his crying and his tefillos are not accepted, that's the situation of the Jew. That's the unfortunate destiny of the Jew who is mitzau rabos mitzaros. Eino mehem. Kol she'eino behester panim. Now we get the flip side. It means ein Hashem masteres panim mimenu. When a person cries out and immediately God hearkens to his tefillos, eino mehem. He's not mizer Yisrael. Because with regard to Zer Yisrael, the Pasuk in Dvarim Lamed Aleph says, Vistarti panim mehem. And the rest of the pasuk reads "Vayala echol," which means that they will be consumed like machal. They will be taken away like biza. Biza meaning, what's the word in English for biza? Spoils. Excellent, spoils. Excellent. Thank you so much. We will be like spoils for the nations that take away our mama, they confiscate our properties, our possessions. And a person who's included in this klala, then you know he's part of Zer Yisrael. But Misha Eino V'Vahayu Lecho. Anyone amongst the non-Jews whose punishment is the ochlin es mamono, that his possessions are consumed, but eino v'hayalechol means eina oved kochavim anishim oso. The ochlin es mamono she'eino mehem. That's a simon that he's not amongst the Jewish people. It means when the Jewish people are fulfilling the will of God, it says, V'achalta es kol ha'amin, asher Hashem elokech noseim lo. But if the Jewish people are not fulfilling the will of God, it says, V'starti panam mehem, v'yalam achol. And even though in this world, they punish him with v'haya lechol. In the world to come, Yoel says, in Sefer Yoel, it says, v'chaltem echol v'savoa v'laltom es-shem Hashem Elokeichem asher osa imochem b'hafli v'lo yevoshu ami liolah. And there's a double phrase here. It's a superfluous language. And the superfluous language is a remez, it's an illusion that li asid yochlu gam masha'achlu mehem ovdei kochav v'ol maseh. That in the future the Umas HaOlam will have to return to the Jewish people that which they took from him. And there's a lot of Torah in Rabbi Nassan on this, but anyway, that's not for us now. So where are we up to here? We're on the top of Daf Hey Amid Beis.